It just seemed such a tragedy that somebody had lived to the point they were at least a teenager and they were missing from somebody's table. She obviously had a name and somebody remembered her. Somebody certainly changed her diaper and fed her and combed her hair at some point in time. Once the internet came along and we were connected to it, and it was a very young internet at the time. There was no Google, there was just startup search engines. So literally tent girl, missing sister, missing daughter, murder, any way that you could combine those searches. My name is Todd Matthews, and I'm known as one of the first cyber detectives. I first heard of the story of the tent girl in 1987. My future wife, Lori, had just moved to Tennessee from Kentucky. I was 17 years old, and it was near Halloween, so we were telling ghost stories. She explained how her father had found a body on the side of the road, wrapped in a canvas tent wrapper, and how a grave had been created with her image on it. No name, just tent girl. That just stuck with me. I had a brother and sister that had passed away as infants years and years ago, and I knew their names. Their name was on their stone, and I felt like tent girl didn't have her real name. And I feel like that's why it stuck with me so strongly for so many years. And I think it was really obsessive right from the get-go. The process of trying to find out who she was immediately began. I looked at magazine articles, newspaper articles. The process of gathering and sorting had already began at 17 years old. Some of the biggest obstacles in the story was getting information. Everything was just hard copy. You know, you had to physically go and pick up a piece of paper or look at a microfilm or physically drive somewhere. It was go to the grave, maybe have my father-in-law repeat something or compare information that was in the article based upon what he told me. The newspaper article described her pretty much as a child, but he said he actually saw her and he felt like that she was possibly older. So there were some data conflicts immediately. So I was looking for more than just a child, perhaps a young person, young woman. And there was no internet. It was all a very manual process. And it was just like cold calls at the time, you know. There was no cell phones. You dialed a number and you hoped that somebody would be on the other end that could help you. It's really hard back in the early days. Ultimately, I ended up at an assembly plant where we made air conditioning parts, and the day job was actually a night job. So it was a little odd. I'm staying up all night long, so I think that darkened the mystery for me. So in the early days that I was trying to work on the case, you know, you would obsess with it. And there was one time in particular, I came home from work and I'd fallen asleep and I heard a noise in the kitchen. And I remember walking into the kitchen and there stood a figure inside of what appeared to be a tent wrapper, a sleeping bag. So it was a figure inside of a bag. And I asked her who she was. And she said, cut me out and you'll know. Get me out the bag and I'll tell you who I am. So, you know, flash forward, you know, she's on the couch and I have a butcher knife in my hand and I'm cutting the tarp, the canvas tent wrapper. I'm cutting through it and I could remember feeling the vibration of the blade and the sound as it was cutting that fabric. And then as it came open, that dark slit popped open and, you know, a decomposed face popped out and I woke up. I was sitting straight up in bed, and it's scary to think of that, to the point that it's obsessed you to that point, that you're that involved in it, that's that much in your head. You know, when you're spending that much time, you're starting to lose sleep. And by this point in time, it was having an effect on my marriage, you know, racking up telephone bills that were difficult to pay, arguments that were difficult to win, rationalizing doing this with no results. You know, at what point do you say enough's enough? There's so many times I said I'm done, but it was more than an obsession. It felt more like an obligation. So it was all the way to the mid-90s. That's when I first heard of the internet. So it's a good 10 years into our marriage before we found the internet, before we realized what the internet was. You know, this was a new tool, so it wasn't endless phone calls, but the internet was still very young. You couldn't just go search a story and pull up a lot of information. A lot of that information had to be put on the internet, but it was a shortcut. It was a way to communicate with people. So I created a website for Tent Girl. I gathered up everything that I did know about her, and I thought, well, maybe if I just put something online. It was the original image of the tombstone, the height and weight that's described. This person could have been between 13 and 21. I tried to find ways to hide it away, and when they were sleeping or I should be sleeping, there was always a way. Snuck off to my little office and just again, missing sister, missing this, missing that. And I would see different databases that would pop up. And I did find a note where a lady in Arkansas was looking for her missing sister, last known to be in Lexington, Kentucky, very short distance away in December of 1967. That's all I needed to hear. That was enough. It was very clear at the time that that's who I was looking for. Once there was an announcement that this was indeed the tent girl, and I'll always remember those words, the tent girl is indeed Barbara Hagman Taylor. You know, that was just chilling. It wasn't just the end of a journey, it was the beginning of another journey. To me, it freed me up. You know, a curse had been lifted. And then the fruit of all this work was there. I didn't know that during this cycle of trying to, piece things together, I didn't know really there were some foundations being laid. After the resolution of the Tent Girl case, the cyber community lit up. I heard from missing persons advocates from all over the world, and I helped in the development of the first database for missing and unidentified persons. So to start working with law enforcement to try to get their cases publicized, digitized, resolutions began to happen. You know, the plight that they had, the fact that it was very difficult to put a name on a body. People brought their problem to the table to help resolve it. And the end result was a national database. I was so blinded by trying to find what I felt I needed that I didn't realize that, some foundational work was being done. That time I spent wasn't just time wasted. There was success in what I was trying to do. And in fact, it left a footprint. It repurposed the use of the internet. It caused people to look at things in the way that I was looking at them. Another way of using the internet, a way of sharing information. Was it well worth it? Yeah, it was. It was well worth it.